Welcome to the Podcast for Inquiry, brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, a national educational charity supporting your community for reason, compassion, and secular humanist values. You have answers? We have questions. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood, board member and secular chair for CFIC. Welcome. Welcome, inquirers, to a special edition of Podcast for Inquiry, brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood. Back in September 2022, CFIC was invited to give a couple of talks at the Third International Humanism Conference on Social Justice, organized by Periyar International. I was asked to speak on humanism in children and women's rights. The event was recorded, and so I'm pleased to share with you today my speech at the Third International Humanism Conference on Social Justice. Enjoy. Good morning, friends here in Toronto. Good evening to my colleagues in Tamil Nadu and to all of those watching this from elsewhere in the world. I am a secular humanist with 4 children, ranging in age from 9 to 18. Over the course of nearly 2 decades, I have learned a lot about raising children in a humanist household. I'd like to share some of these insights with you. And to start, I would like to tell you how I found my way to secular humanism. Your path, I'm sure, was different. And for my children and all of those in the next generation, the route will be as different and individual as each one of them. In my early 20s, I came across 4 lines of what Epicurus is thought to have written 2.5 millennia ago. Is God willing to prevent evil, but not able? Then he is not omnipotent. Is he able, but not willing? Then he is malevolent. Is he both able and willing? Then whence cometh evil? Is he neither able nor willing? Then why call him God? In 2,500 years, despite strenuous efforts from numerous apologists, no satisfactory answer to Epicurus' challenge has been forthcoming. This was when I became a secular humanist, though I didn't learn the term until a couple of years later. With the realization that there was and is no celestial safety net to prevent undesirable outcomes, I accepted that if the world is to become a better place, it is up to us collectively. Now, there are many branches of every school of philosophy, and humanism is no exception. Whether one subscribes to the writings of Periyar or to the wisdom of the Thirukural, the American Humanist Association Humanist Manifesto, Humanist International's Declaration of Modern Humanism, or a personal worldview based on humanist ideals. We all seek truth, desire to live in harmony with ourselves and others, and work to improve the world we live in for our mutual benefit and those of our collective descendants. We do not seek to impose our perspectives on others. Ours, humanism, is not a proselytizing cult. We work to convince, not to coerce. We rely on knowledge, reason, and compassion to communicate what we believe to others and why. And nowhere is this more important than with our children. Both humanist and religious parents desire to inculcate a sense of ethics in their children. The difference is not always what is deemed good, although sometimes there are very important divergences, but rather why one should act in a moral manner. Religions impose dictates on their followers. Do this or don't do that because the deities have so commanded. The gods are immensely powerful and they are watching you, and with their judgment will come immense rewards or punishments. This is a surveillance-based authoritarian approach. If religions, as Richard Dawkins proposes, are viruses of the mind, it is not enough to prevent infection in our children. We cannot effectively quarantine our kids. At some point, they will encounter believers and proselytizers among their friends or from charismatic adults. Instead, to extend the virus metaphor, we should inoculate our children against religious indoctrination. We can start by reading the myths from around the world to them. Greek, Jewish, Roman, Christian, German, Muslim, Indian, Japanese, Hindu, African, Buddhist, indigenous, Wiccan, on and on. Expose your children to stories from around the globe. Explain that people used legends to make sense of the world before we came to our modern scientific understanding. There is often great wisdom embedded in these tales, and it is worthwhile making the effort with your children to look at each story from multiple perspectives. We should not deny our children the cultural heritage embedded in the Old and New Testaments, Bhagavad Gita, Koran, Tao Te Ching, and many others. Surveys in North America and Europe show that non-believers are more familiar with the content of religious texts than most of the faithful, and so it should be with our children. By raising our kids without the imposition of deities and their various demands, humanist parents elegantly sidestep the problem of evil. Jettisoning the sacred scrolls has its clear advantages, but what replaces the thousands of years of tradition associated with them? My answer is 4 foundational principles, and I'm actually quite relieved to note that you've heard all of these from various speakers earlier today. There's an interesting convergence here. Respect, equality, accepting uncertainty, and understanding. To take these in order, respect. Some variation of the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, has evolved in every civilization in our species' history. But it's not obvious to young people. A memorable parenting moment, if I can be personal for a moment, was when one of my kids came up to me sobbing and said, my brother hit me back. Yeah, it wasn't easy for me to keep a straight face either. But it did allow a demonstration of why we accept limitations on ourselves. Don't hit others. And in order to receive much larger benefits, don't get hit by others. From there, we can continue to expand the circle of empathy from one's self to one's siblings, to one's family, to one's friends, to strangers, and ultimately to all of humanity. Equality. I strive to teach each of my children that they are important, but their siblings are equally so, as are the people they see and talk to every day. The actions our children take also have ramifications on others, whether it's a thoughtless comment that hurts another's feelings, dropping a piece of litter that someone else will need to pick up, or forgetting to make good on a promise made. The impact is real, even if we don't see it directly. One of our jobs as parents, as I see it, is to point them out. We must consider the effects our actions have on others and pass that insight on to our children. Uncertainty. Scientific knowledge is always provisional, and there are many things we simply do not know. How we view the universe today may well need to change in the years and decades to come as our understanding deepens. And that is okay. Being vulnerable and showing that you do not have all the answers is a sign of strength and humility. I told my kids that when I was their age, I did not think there was life elsewhere in the universe, We thought at the time that planets were exceptionally rare and the conditions for life as we understand it were so particular, I believed it was unique to our planet. I've changed my mind. Now we know that planets are commonplace. Many exist in what astronomers call the habitable zone. So in light of this new information, I changed my opinion. In all likelihood, I think we are not alone in the universe. But we don't know. So my opinions, both as a child and now as an adult, are provisional. We can show our children that uncertainty is a part of life, and we can live with it comfortably. It's a sign of wisdom to change one's mind in light of new knowledge or novel arguments. And to many questions, I don't know is a perfectly acceptable answer. And the fourth foundational principle is understanding. Kids are naturally curious about their environment. Let them experiment. In many cases, they can learn lessons by themselves simply from natural consequences. If they don't bring an umbrella when it's raining, they'll get wet. If they don't wear a long-sleeve shirt on a fall morning, they might get cold. Aside from life-threatening situations, and my kids, I assure you, are as fascinated with electrical sharp sockets, sharp knives, and running out into busy streets as anyone else's, I've tried to let my children make their own choices and take responsibility for the consequences. One implication of this, and I have to confess, I came late to this realization, and it remains very difficult for me even to this day, is that sometimes you have to let your children fail. But the flip side, a life where success is largely guaranteed by one's parents, makes victories hollow and ill prepares them for adulthood. By setting a foundation of equality, respect for one's self and others, and nurturing their natural curiosity about the world, we can have open and honest conversations with our children about the important questions of ethics, morality, and purpose in our lives. And the best thing is, we don't have to agree upon or even necessarily come to any of the answers. What matters is not so much what you say to your children as what you do with them. And your influence as a parent is more limited than you might think. Kids learn far more from their peers than they do from their parents. I am comfortable with this fact because I do not seek to have the next generation think precisely as I do. That's indoctrination, not critical thinking. Instead, we should all take the more challenging and much more rewarding path of giving our children the tools by which they can make their own choices, hopefully wise or even enlightened about how they will navigate in this world. I will learn soon enough how well I have equipped my children. My eldest son left home earlier this month and now lives over 1,200 kilometers away to pursue his university education. It is my hope that he will thrive away from the protective canopy of his parents. We should all want our children to be able to explore independently, to come to their own conclusions, and to make their own way in the world. I hope I have been a good father to all of my children. Thank you. Now, I was asked today to speak about humanism in children and women's rights. You might have noticed that so far I've spoken only about humanism in children. This is because I wanted to focus on my main areas of expertise. But I will say this. Women's rights are human rights, and women all too often bear the brunt of human rights violations. As humanists, we must advocate on behalf of all, and we are failing women badly all around the world. Women in the United States have recently lost the right to bodily autonomy in a dozen states, a number that is growing seemingly weekly. Women in Canada's second most populous province cannot get a government job if they wear the wrong sort of headgear. In other countries, women who do not wear that same headgear are subject to being arrested or beaten or in the case of Iran less than 2 weeks ago, killed. In India, sexual violence against women is endemic. At this conference, this very conference this weekend, we are sorely lacking in hearing the voices of half of humanity. By my count, out of 25 featured speakers, only one is a woman. We must do better in raising women's voices, listening to them, so that we may learn what needs to be done. We have so much work to do in the world. Also, we must do better ourselves. Change needs to start with us. Thank you. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Links for today's discussion can be found in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please subscribe and engage in the conversation. Comment, rate, and review. Email us at podcast@centerforinquiry.ca. We'd love to hear your perspective. The Podcast for Inquiry is brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada. We are a national educational charity supporting reason, compassion, and secular values. To our supporters, thank you. If you have not yet contributed, please consider making a donation at centerforinquiry.ca/donate or becoming a member at centerforinquiry.ca/join. Your contribution supports our efforts to have rational and evidence-based decision-making everywhere. CFIC is on the web at centerforinquiry.ca. We are on Facebook, and follow us on Twitter at CFI Canada. Podcast for Inquiry is produced and edited by Lee Shields, Zach Dumont, and Martin Zielinski. Music by Anthony Lazaro. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood. See you next time.